As Sir Ken Robinson so accurately points out in his speech about the British and American education systems, we in Australia have a system of education that is modelled on the interests of industrialisation and in the image of it. Children in this country are educated in batches determined by age group and are taught a curriculum determined by government bodies. Our schools are large formal public institutions established by government departments, institutions such as churches, or formally incorporated bodies with an interest in a particular form of education. However, it hasn't always been this way. Around 100 years ago, there was no standardised curriculum, no government funding, and no government mandate that children had to attend school. Until the formation of education departments after 1872, most schools were conducted as family businesses and only a small proportion of teachers were employed for wages. When my grandmother went to school in Tasmania in the 1930s, she was told by her teacher that writing with your left hand was evil and the mark of the devil. Her teacher would strap the pencil to her right hand and she was forced to learn to write in this most unnatural way. When my mother was in grade 3 in 1964, she stayed behind one day after class to help a friend clean up their mess. Her teacher saw this and wrongfully accused my mother of making the mess. She received a rap on the knuckles with a ruler while she cried hot tears of shame. The injustice of this moment in her young life is still stark and clear in my mother's memory. She was also left-handed, but by the 1960s it seems this was more widely accepted, and making mess was the issue. And me? As well as being an adorable child, I managed to complete my schooling with no vitriol directed at me due to my left-handedness. In my Victorian primary school in the late 1990s, my teachers were, for the most part, kind and encouraging people who identified and nurtured my talents, recognised and helped to develop my weaknesses, and tried their best to ensure that my classroom environment was a safe learning space. Using the women of my family as an example, it is easy to see that every aspect of the education system, perhaps apart from the architecture of the classroom, has evolved for the better in the past 100 years. Discrimination and corporal punishment have been outlawed, and as the role of women in our society has changed, so has the education of girls and boys in order to reflect these changes. Social, political, industrial, philosophical and economic conditions have improved, and we can only hope they continue to do so. As the Australian education system has developed, and on the eve of the launch of a national curriculum, it is clear to see that the priorities of schools today differ greatly from schools in the 19th and even 20th centuries. Teachers prioritise today to create safe learning environments for students and work to differentiate their lessons so that every student can feel success. The industry of education in Australia has changed rapidly over the past century. So rapidly, in fact, that schools struggle to keep curriculum current and learning technologies up to date. Schools started out with blackboards and dipping ink, progressed to pens and paper, and are now struggling to stay afloat in an increasingly exciting and complex world of information technology. Overhead projectors, laptop computers, iPads and digital cameras should have revolutionised the way schools are run, and slowly, they are getting there. This has had a huge impact on today's teachers, as we are expected not only to have a thorough knowledge of the content that we teach, but to seamlessly integrate ICT into our classroom practices. The most contentious economic issue in Australian education is the way that schools are funded. Rather than allowing private, fee-paying, wealthy institutions to use their own money, governments pull funding from public schools and redistribute it amongst the wealthy. This is appalling and has been left to run unchecked since the deregulation of the ways private schools could be funded in 1996. However, unsurprisingly, the Gonski Review looked closely at how schools in Australia were funded and found that governments were investing far too little into public schools. They also found that the way money is distributed is not efficient, effective, or fair. The Gonski Review calls to raise funding by up to $1,500 per student in public schools, thus allowing students with disadvantages and disabilities to be catered for. In Australia in 2012, education is a heavily politicised issue. In Victoria alone, calls from politicians to introduce divisive policies such as performance pay in schools have forced teachers to protest. Teachers are currently calling out Premier Ted Baillieu on his abandoned promise to make Victorian teachers the highest paid in Australia. These protests have far-reaching implications for principals, teachers, students and parents. Historically, teachers have had to fight the government tooth and nail for simple necessities, and the disrespect shown to teachers in schools by the government means that this struggle is by no means over. Today, Australian parents need to ask themselves a number of questions when deciding where to send their children to school. For example, is my child safe and happy? How do they adjust to change? Can we afford to send them to an independent school? Do I believe in private schooling? Which model of education do we think is right for our child? What is the closest state school? Do they have a good reputation? What subjects do they offer? What disciplinary strategies do they employ? Do I think my child will excel at VCE? Will my child make friends easily? If not, how do we fix this? If my child is different from the other students, will this affect her? How do I ensure my child is receiving all the attention and support she needs? This is a lot to ponder when your child is only 6 years old, and the fact is that there are a lot of unknown elements that can influence a child's education. However, statistically, we know that the most important school factor in success for disadvantaged students is the influence of the teacher. This idea is at the basis of all my thinking about education and shapes the decisions I make as a beginning teacher. I hope Australian education will continue to evolve and that we are able to truly differentiate our curriculum enough so that every student finds a pathway.